Welcome, everyone, to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here again. I know we're stacking a couple up for our travel time here.
Yeah.
So let's go. Let's roll.
That's right. We have been a rush with content, right? A rush with guests, and I'm so excited for this one. This is one we've been working on for a while. We got a chance to talk on the source with Daily Pay over at PayCon. And I'm so excited to have this guest today, Mr. Jerome Gouvernel, the co-founder and CEO of datascaleHR. I'm so excited to see you here. Welcome, Jerome.
Pete, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And Julie, it's great to be with you.
Thanks. Same here. We're excited. We got lots to talk about today.
I know. Jerome, look, I'm so excited to get into this with you. I want to talk integrations. I want to talk Gen AI. I want to talk global payroll. But first, we ask every guest.
Pete, let me ask the fun stuff.
Oh, you
today.
Go ahead. Yeah, do it.
Okay. Jerome, we ask everyone, and we'd love to hear how you got into, where did you get your start in HR and or payroll? And then why on earth do you stay?
It's my only skill. No, hopefully not. But I think I got my start like everybody else by mistake. I'm an IT guy originally. I used to be a coder, and I landed some job. It was some security company. They lost their payroll administrator, and they asked me, do you think, you know computers, so do you think you could work the payroll system for us? And I think I was 21 years old or something. And that's literally how I started, cutting checks and, paying people. And I absolutely hated it. Running payroll is a really difficult job, as you guys know. Yeah. So, but I really enjoyed the challenge of it. And on the back of that, I got a really cool job about integrating an AS400, so an old IBM system that nobody could connect with, building a front end for that, an HR front end. That was for a construction company, and then connecting the payroll engine into that. So way back then, I was already doing, connectivity and data transformation and APIs and all that kind of stuff.
Was that mainframe type systems?
It was an IBM AS400 coded in RPG. It was terrible. It was horrible.
So Jerome, you said a few times that, it was awful. I hated it, but you must like something has changed, right? You have to have found some angle that you just absolutely love about this.
I love the fact that it's so difficult. I love how hard it is. And I love the fact that it hides its complexity. I love the fact that you would think that it's easy and it's not. And I also like the cultural aspect to payroll. I know it's going to sound weird, but because I've been doing payroll in various regions of the world over my lifetime, and then when we were doing Global View at ADP, we were doing like 45 countries. You realize that a lot of the payroll rules and the way you think about paying people is deeply tied into the culture of the country. And, tax systems, tax tables even reflect the culture of the country. And I just find that fascinating.
It is. Yeah, that's what always kept me in payroll, right? Is, not kept me in payroll, but drew me to it. I think it initially was just that challenge, right? It's like, it is so complicated and it's not the same. It's the same, but it's not, when you go company to company and country to country, all of those things are just, there's so many variables.
And it doesn't stop changing, right? I mean,
it doesn't.
It's the master of never, mastery of never with payroll, because it's just moving.
You're putting your finger on one of the founding thesis of datascale, actually. This idea that it's never ending. And when we talk about, data integration and the ability to consume, data from HR system sources or feeding it into a payroll engine or whatever, all of those integrations change over time. And if that's one thing we know for certain, is that they're going to keep changing. Mm-hmm. And that's been, in my opinion, one of the biggest hurdle and stumbling block for new entrants in the industry. I see a lot of folks from the fintech industry who, decided to give payroll, a try. And unlike fintech and a lot of other industries where it's also complicated, but the data itself tends to remain fairly constant over time. When you transfer money from one bank to another, those standards don't change 3 times a year. They tend to change, every couple of years or maybe every 10 years. And in our world, things like APIs don't really solve the problem, because APIs tend to be fixed interfaces, and we live in a dynamic payroll world.
Oh, I can't wait to dig into that more, because APIs are kind of the talk of the town these days as a substitute for SFTPs and other flat file transfers, and yet you're raising an incredibly important point, which is there's a staticness about that as well that you really have to be thinking about.
Yeah, Jerome, we were one of the things I wanted to talk about while you were here was you have a lot of great posts on LinkedIn, but one of the ones I thought was really interesting was your analogy to global payroll being somewhat like food and delivering food to everyone, right? Like, talk about that, because I think that's a great place to start with this challenge, right? Of what we're facing when it comes to global payroll and trying to solve for global payroll.
Yes, my favorite analogy or metaphor, never sure. Cooking. I love cooking, so everything looks like a kitchen to me. I think somebody made the comment that what's stopping anyone from building a global payroll engine? Like, it's that familiar rant. Somebody should just build a global payroll engine, right? And to me, I thought, okay, so payroll is different in every country, but how different is it really? And then I thought about food, and I thought, well, everybody needs to eat. So you could argue that you could just build a single kitchen and feed everybody. And I think technically that is correct. You can. And some of us have actually done that, right? But does that mean that everybody will like the same food? Does that mean that you will be successful in every region that you enter by providing the same menu to everyone? And clearly the answer is no. Even if you take the most standardized restaurant in the world, McDonald's, if any of you guys have ever tried a McDonald's outside of the US, you'll know it is very different. It tastes very different. The menu is different. In fact, it's almost unrecognizable except for a few menu items. And it occurred to me that there's a lot of things you can standardize about payroll, for sure. And that makes sense to standardize. But ultimately, what makes a successful payroll service in a country is its ability to get it done according to local rules. Nobody cares about what technology you're deploying. Nobody cares about standardization. The only thing that employees care about is getting paid correctly on time in that country. And so the metaphor goes, there's so many different ways you can think about this problem. There are reusable components. So in the same way that you can build, a stove, and you can use the same stove in any country in the world, that is true. You can do the same with payroll. You can build components that are reusable. But ultimately, the cooking itself is local. And so that was my main thought about that. And the other aspect of this is the economic aspect. When you're thinking about building a global payroll engine, most likely you're sitting in the US or in North America, let's say, or in Western Europe. That is where the capital is. That's typically where the know-how sits. And so you're basically building a solution at first world costs, so high costs. But the majority of countries you're going to be serving are much low-cost countries, and the economics just don't work. So you can technically build a global payroll engine and you can localize it, but the volumes that you're going to need for this to be a profitable operations are absolutely enormous. And I know this firsthand because, I've worked for the biggest payroll operator in the world, and we had the biggest volumes, and it's still, we couldn't make it work in some regions.
Yeah. Jerome, do you think that the aggregator model versus, say, because there's a lot of argument for the agility of that, the fact that, look, you're right, you can't necessarily, there's some that are trying, there are many that are trying to build it all, right? Niamo, for example, has got 100 engines. You've got many like Mercon's trying to do that. But Do you see any benefit to, say, the aggregator model where you are localizing your engines under the hood, but you're coordinating, consolidating at one point, versus, say, a more direct or organic native capability? Do you see either of those being any more favorable than the other?
Well, so let me start by saying full disclosure. I mean, my team and I built the original sort of global payroll engine.
Right.
And so we spent 15 years just getting that right. And so you'd think that I'm a proponent of that model, but in fact, it's kind of turned me off that model because I've seen the limitations of it.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to compete with the flexibility and the accuracy of a well-incentivized local provider. By well-incentivized, I mean a local payroll provider who has a significant market share. In other words, they have every incentive to get payroll done correctly, on time, every time, to keep up with the compliance requirements, to make sure that they're well connected with all of the government offices that ultimately impact, payroll outputs, the people who consume the payroll reports, being on first name basis with some key government administration people to get the inside track on the latest legislation and how it might impact payroll rules and payroll reporting and, just format changes in reports. If you're a global operator, you have the technical tools to do all this, but it's going to be very hard for you to be as well connected as the local players. And so ultimately what that translates into is cost. Because for you to be as efficient, you're just going to have to spend more. You're going to have a bigger team. You're going to have more quality control. It's just a bigger machine, right, in terms of development, R&D, and service. So I just think that local players are inherently always going to be more efficient.
Yeah. Well, and they're on the ground, right? I mean, they're living it. They're the action, making the action happen. A lot of times the last mile, even if you do have the calc engine, you still need some of that local. We were just talking this on an episode recently about Africa, how you have to take in some entities paper, wet ink paper, to the with signatures to the local offices. So in a lot of ways, they are payroll right on the ground, even if there's a calc engine in your system.
What I love about the Workforce Agility Limited Series by Cornerstone was we talked to executives and customers all about skills. Cornerstone has a wonderful background in learning and development, training, etc. Their LMS is world class, but they've centered the business now, not just on that, like building upon that, but building upon how everything has moved to the skills economy. So check out the limited series called Workforce Agility, and you can get it wherever you get your podcast. And it's just a wonderful series where we talk to their executives on the shift of why, and also their customers that are using it. So check it out whenever you get a chance. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And by the way, I started my career in Africa, so I'm very familiar with this sort of very long tail of small, simple payrolls. And I say, I'm doing air quotes when I say simple because it's never simple. Right. Everything has its own idiosyncrasies, and if you don't know what they are, you're not going to get it right. So the other thing I was going to say, it's interesting. Back when I started, like 30 years ago, technology was a problem. I think a lot of countries didn't have access to the kind of technology that would allow them to build efficient payroll systems. I mean, still now a little bit, but 20 years ago, it was quite common to see payroll engines that were just terrible.
Yeah, I would argue they weren't good at development.
They were terrible at development, and the products they built were just terrible products. They just didn't work, right? They couldn't do one thing. They couldn't do off-cycle. They couldn't do retro calcs. I mean, there were limitations. And so they would typically force the customer to do unnatural things. This was a real problem 20 years ago. I would say today, you can get the best technology from the cloud. Anybody, anywhere in the world can develop a modern payroll engine. You have the tools. So technology is no longer a reason to do a centralized payroll development project, right? It made a lot of sense 20 years ago, but now it's not. Right? If I'm a small company in the middle of Africa and I don't have many resources, I can still get the latest and greatest technology to build a payroll engine. So the advantage of the big players over the small players has vanished. So what's the value add of building a global payroll engine? And the argument always goes back to, well, we can standardize better. But the reality is you can't, because standardization, and I know this because we've tried to do it. Standardization, you can do some standardization, of course, but the standardization that matters you can't really do, because the process of payroll is inherently different in every country. So it's not a technology problem. It's a workflow problem.
Mm-hmm.
And those are, if it's not a technology problem, then you're not going to solve it with technology.
Jerome, you mentioned, I've seen you mention before your point of view that the system of record is actually killing the industry. Is that what you're kind of referring to here in some ways?
It kind of, it's actually a similar, it's similar. It's not exactly the same in my mind. When I talk about that, I make reference to why ERP got so successful and why it was so vital that ERP was successful for the world. My first years of work were pre-ERP days. So I saw, when I was talking about that AS400 earlier, that's a perfect example. When somebody designed that AS400 payroll system that I worked on, they did not have any reference data model. They just made it up. They just literally constructed a system out of nothing. And so that was the case for all enterprise systems. Things were just built from the ground up over decades of development, and nothing made sense. You couldn't integrate any system with any other because none of these things could talk to one another because they were so different. And that was a mess that needed to be cleaned up. So ERP came alive because of this. That was the reason that ERP came along, is to essentially, address this problem. But in the process of doing that, it created a huge other problem, which is this idea that you can model everything. So you can have engineers sitting in Germany, because I'm an SAP guy, so I'll use Germany as the example, but it's the same anywhere. It could be in San Francisco or anywhere else. You have a bunch of really smart people who sit in a room, get on a whiteboard and say, okay, how do we design a global system? And they're going to do this the best they can. And they're going to formalize a data model. They're going to formalize rules. They're going to formalize a bunch of business objects. And those things will then dictate for decades to come, like 30, 40, 50 years after that, will dictate how business is done for that particular function. It's kind of insane if you think about it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
and the people who actually know how business should be done, those are not those people. In terms of payroll, if you really want to know how payroll works and how to optimize a payroll, you need to ask somebody who does payroll every month in the country where it's done and have a conversation with these people. And that's where the optimization lives. So the problem with system of records is that they're indirectly stifling innovation everywhere else by setting these, they're setting this universal framework, which makes sense for no one.
So what do you think that means for payroll then?
Well, I think so. Back to this aggregation model, I think if you take an aggregation model, it makes more sense on so many levels, because aggregation is an emergent phenomenon, meaning that those are operations that happen at local level, independently of one another. They all kind of do similar things, right? Payroll in South Africa is kind of similar to payroll in Spain, but it's not the same.
Right.
And you do this 150 times or 180 times or how many countries you have. And out of this, with the tools we have now, meaning machine learning, artificial intelligence, I was going to use the word big data, but that's, antiquated now. But the ability to analyze large sets of similar but unrelated data, and you can emerge order out of this chaos. It's actually really simple to do. So instead of trying to force everybody to use the same rules and the same standards and the same structures and the same data model, let people do what they think is right. And then overlay that with a sort of an AI-based analysis. And then get your data out. Standardize your data model if you like, but do it on the way out. Don't get in the way of people building products, right? It's a reporting problem. It's not a design problem.
Yeah, interesting. One of the other things that you've talked about before too is the idea that payroll outsourcing is its own worst enemy. What do you mean by that?
I've seldom met a prospect or any company or any HR person that said, I really want to keep payroll in-house, right? I've met a few times, right? I'm not going to lie. Maybe 10 times in my entire career, I've spoken to someone who would say something like this. Everybody wants to outsource because it just makes sense. It's just one of those things. I mean, it's no coincidence that it was the first outsourced process in enterprise, right? When ADP started, this was the first time that anybody actually outsourced any type of accounting in a electronic way. So the vast majority of companies out there would prefer not to do their own payroll. So then let me ask you, why is it that the vast majority of them still do?
Yeah, I got a few answers for that.
Well, yeah, and so there are a list of reasons. Exactly. I mean, this is why we're here talking about this. I think one of the biggest reasons is simply the cost of changing.
Yep. The pain. Yeah. And the fear. There's so much fear.
I think the other angle of that is just like there's no single agreement of what it means when somebody says, I want to outsource payroll. For some folks, it's just technology. For others, clearly there's the tax and, and some of the end services or service bureau type stuff. And then there's all this gray stuff that even the providers in the marketplace can't figure out how to align on their taxonomy. They all call whatever the heck they want to call it, right? Whether it's comprehensive or managed services, it means something different to every provider, every model, and trying to parse those nuances is an impossible task, even with a fairly sophisticated buyer, much less the unsophisticated buyer. And I don't know if that will change anytime soon.
Yeah, that comment about people not totally outsourcing it or going and outsourcing it or fewer people doing it, it reminds me of I don't know if you've seen Thomas Otter's quote about, we're moving billions of dollars through these rudimentary processes and systems that are outdated, right? I can't remember what it is exactly, but he's right? We're processing millions and billions. Often on Excel and other tools. I mean, I've had vendors tell me that in some long tail places, Excel is still their biggest competitor.
It's absolutely true that Excel is
it's crazy.
The primary technology of the payroll industry is Excel.
It is. Yeah. Is that costly? Like, why is that, do you think?
Oh, well, we can get into that conversation in a minute because but Excel is a fascinating topic. It's like learning another language and another culture. Yeah. But I was going to pick up on what Julie was saying. So there's no standardization of service, which, by the way, is one of the key reasons why payroll services should always be local first. Because the very fact that it's so different from country to country means that it's very hard to standardize across the world. And so, in the US, benefits is a big deal, right? Managing benefits is a very big deal. And you can't really run a payroll for enterprise unless you have a solution for benefits somewhere. In most other countries, people have no idea what you're talking about, right? It's not even something on their radar. The fact that it's just an example, but this exists for everything. And so I think it reinforces the idea that it should be a local service, hyper-local service. I think those were your words, Pete, on one of your posts. So the primary reason I think that people don't outsource is that it's just easier and perceived as less risk to continue doing it in-house. It's not because they want to do it in-house. It's just that it's less costly in terms of resources, risk, and money.
Yeah, there's still this idea, I think, Julie, you could probably vouch for this. I think there are still a lot of folks out there that think if you outsource means cheaper. And I have repeatedly told people, you cannot assume that. You're stepping into an innovation cycle, an innovation engine that should presumably be future-proofing. I hate that word. Your payroll, you can't expect that to be cheaper than the clunky mess that you have today. How like this idea that that's what you're gonna do just doesn't. I don't think it normally works. What do you think, Julie?
I think the other part of that is, technology, great. Technology is doing more. But unless you really have lived a little bit of payroll and different flavors of payroll, you kind of think about it still in the age old bookkeeper, like how much time did you spend? And I'm going to multiply that by rates. I'm going to take out some taxes and voila, right? I've finished my payroll. Kind of the same framework around the world. And that underplays significantly what we've been talking about for over a year now, 2 years probably, that the art of payroll is really in the complexity and the compliance and just it's almost like being a lawyer or being an accountant, and the certifications aren't there. And, but when you really are doing payroll and getting into payroll, you are doing a higher end job and not a lower end job if you have the right enabling tools, right? And so you can't just expect it's a transactional low level activity that's going to be outsourced at the cheapest price. I mean, you can expect that, but you get what you get.
Yeah. You get what you pay for sure. Yeah. For sure.
So I think two things around this. One is the implementation friction cost, the time that it takes to implement payroll. So right. if a large company, let's say operating in 10 countries, decides to outsource payroll, it's a 2 or 3 year project. That's the reality. And I think, back to your question about why I think that, the outsourcing industry is its worst enemy, is because it's never dealt with that problem. There is an assumption, and all the providers, it's almost like there's a tacit agreement across all providers, we're going to charge a lot of money for implementation, and it's going to take a lot of time. And it's not, and I'm not blaming anyone, because I've been part of the problem my entire career. But if you're a customer, the first thing you see about this project of yours to standardize and do better payroll, to Julie's point, like to get it done correctly and is this massive upfront investment. And people just walk away. This is go like,
it's going to take me years. Why do I bother, right?
And the nature of payroll in a company is, because it's typically not seen as strategic. I mean, it's vital, but not strategic. Other projects get funded first. And so I think that the level of outsourcing that we see currently is a fraction of what it could be. And one of our big goal with datascale is removing that upfront implementation cost completely. Yeah. And that's one of the things it's one of our key features, if you like. And it's the reason we founded the company. It's like, okay, so can we make implementation take 1 hour instead of 6 months?
Yep.
And what would it take to do that? So that's the idea. That was the answer to your question. But then you also raised, something about Excel. I love talking about Excel, because Excel is fascinating to me. We used to run large design teams and UX research, and we used to do all these amazing UX people. And they used to come up with all these amazing UIs, and we used to bring people in to test it. Do you like it this way? Do you prefer it that way? How many clicks to do this, and how much do you move your mouse around? And, all these studies to try and optimize screens. And at the end of the day, the truth is, our real competitor was Excel.
And we all have it, right? It's cheap as well, but it's certainly not viable for the future. But Jerome, it's interesting that what you're saying, that theme of the arduous heavy lift deployment. I think that's why you're seeing the SaaS players like the Payslips of the world, right, getting into managed service deals and winning, because the ROI and the speed to market that they can do or achieve is significantly different than this rip and replace mentality of everything's got to go and we've got to start from scratch, and it's going to be this long phased approach, where these guys can stand up, lay on top of whatever, your choice of local providers, or they can bring local providers. And I think that flexibility is really, really, really coming around even if, Julie, think about the reasoning behind UKG buying Immedis. I asked, hey, no engines, why Immedis? And they said this wasn't an engine play. This was an agility and speed play, right? The ability for us to bring global data and global payroll to a consolidated point, harmonized point quickly, for that ROI, right?
I think, to me, what's interesting about that part of the market, right? It's the middleware market, right? The Payslips, the Papayas, the Payzar, right? In that whole area. And It's still emerging, and it doesn't tackle the same level of services in some way. And so, it's growing, and it's hard to grow and to grow yourself out around the globe. As we find, most of these end up with, private equity funding, and there's a lot of stuff that has to be done to make some of these things happen. And I've worked recently on implementing one, and there were still a lot of hanging chads, let's just say, right? As you kind of work toward maturity in some of those areas.
Hey, it's Libby DeLucian. If you're sick of business advice that sounds cute but doesn't actually move the needle forward, this one's for you. The Libby DeLucian podcast is where we go one layer deep. No gurus, no glitter, just straight up unfiltered talk about scaling a business, running a household, and holding on to your sanity in the middle of the chaos. If you're the bottleneck in your business or in your own life, I'll show you how to fix it. Simple, tactical, and one layer deep every time. Let's go. Visit libbyd.com and check out our podcast today.
Get ready to turn up the volume on your HR game. I'm Jay Arnold, former musician turned HR leader and host of Backstage Pass, the HR Rockstar. Each episode pulls back the curtain on key HR topics, from leadership lessons and bold career pivots to the latest in HR tech and talent strategies, featuring the rock stars within their industries. If you're ready to shake up the status quo and amplify your impact, this is your all-access pass. You can catch the show on the Work-Defying Podcast Network and wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now, and let's rock the future of work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Jerome, what do you think about the idea of this sort of race to the bottom? Are we commoditizing payroll to the point where it's not going to be really worth it for vendors to even be in the game anymore? I've had so many questions about this, especially in the EOR world, which I know you get a lot of. Your customers are EOR and payroll providers, right? So, what do you think about that? This sort of idea that we're in a race to the bottom.
It's a classic supply and demand problem. I think the demand right now is soft, and that's the reason that demand was high before. It was a zero interest rate phenomenon for sure. 10 years ago or 6-7 years ago, when interest rates were basically zero, massive capital investments across all industries around the world meant that, companies were hiring the best engineers they could wherever they could. And so that created the initial burst of demand that got, EORs started. The money always follows. And so there was a massive influx of investment in the EOR industry, and we saw hundreds, thousands of EOR providers sprouting everywhere. And unfortunately, with this high inflation situation that sort of occurred, COVID hit and nobody expected that, it's frozen the growth of the industry. And when I say frozen, not completely frozen, but a lot of the assumptions around growth just aren't panning out. So there is that. So there's a glut of supply, and the demand has not kept growing. Now it might restart, but for now, that's what it is. And then the supply side, it's hard to get differentiated. I mean, they're all offering similar services, and you try to differentiate yourself. So some of them have taken a technology differentiation. So they basically say we're a technology first provider. So the reason you might want to go with us is because we're super easy to connect to. So you can, connect your existing systems into us, and it's all API driven. You never have to talk to a human being. Everything's done programmatically, and the cost is low. And then you've got others doing the classic sort of ADP thing, which is, we're a service company. With us, anytime you have a problem, you just pick up the phone 24/7 and you'll have a specialist on the end of the line. But at the end of the day, there are more suppliers than there is demand. And so that's the race to the bottom, unfortunately. And a lot of these guys are starting to look at other sort of tangential business opportunities like global payroll, for example, which is really not their core business. And a lot of them are discovering what all of the global payroll providers have known for a very long time, which is it's really, really hard to get good gross margins on payroll. You have to be extremely efficient. Like when you're an EOR player, the game is you sell your service as high as you can a very high cost, a very high price per worker. And for that, you give them complete end-to-end service, right? So hire me a worker in country X, and I don't want any problems. I want everything to be smooth. I don't want to have to deal with any issues. That's what you're getting. When you're a global payroll provider, it's the opposite. It's like, here is the service you're getting. Here's a list of 50 things I'm going to do for you. I'm not going to do one extra thing, right? If it's not listed, you're not getting it. But you're getting it for $20 a month.
Yeah, I wish we had sound effects, Pete. I'm like, preach, Jerome, preach.
We do. We actually do. I don't know how to use them well, but we do. We need it. Yeah, we need like a yay, whatever. But no, I completely agree. But Jerome, do you think in some ways that the global payroll platforms are relegating themselves to middleware, or maybe not relegating, but like, are they turning into middleware?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I wrote a blog about this because I was wondering out loud what may happen there. I think if this were me, that is what I would do. I would say, I don't want to be an EOR because that's so. Before I answer the question, so what this is doing is it's forcing EORs to want to become global payroll providers.
Yes, they all think they are, and let's clarify, they're not. Yeah. Yeah, they blurred the line. The marketing has blurred the lines. Let's be honest here.
And by the way, one of our key messages is if you really want to do this, we don't recommend you do it, but if you really want to do this, we can help you do this because we know global payroll. So we can help you transition from one to the other. But your question about the payroll providers is the other way around, right? So can payroll providers who do high volume, low margin, highly automated businesses, can they become a white glove concierge type of service, which is what EORs do? And I would say purely from a DNA standpoint, in other words, how finances are organized in those companies, how investments are decided in those companies, who invests in those companies. So who are the private equity funds that have invested in those companies? I would say no, because they would have to they would have to become a different animal. They would have to build new teams, new sales teams, new service teams. EOR is not a natural extension of payroll.
I don't know if the reverse is true either. I'm not sure that global payroll is a natural extension of EOR either.
Are you guys familiar with that article from Anshu Sharma, who wrote 10 years ago about the stack fallacy?
No. Tell me about that.
The fallacy is that you always think that you can understand and therefore solve for the problem that is above you, right? So if you're a database provider, you think you can become an ERP player because your customers are ERP customers.
I got it, because it's adjacent, you're saying.
Well, it's actually above. Yeah. So it's the same concept, but it's above you, right? In the stack, in the technology stack, it always feels like you always feel like you can understand the next problem, so you could solve for it. But it's a fallacy because you don't really understand it. You think you understand it, but you don't. Whereas, in fact, you would probably be more successful going down stack if you really wanted to, even though going down stack may seem obscure, because you would become your own customer. And because you are your own customer, if you're going down stack, you're building technology that you would consume yourself. Being your own customer is the best guarantee for success. And I often think of that, and I've seen this turn out to be true in so many instances. So I think it was a brilliant insight that he had. But in the context that we're discussing today, if you are in EOR and you start doing global payroll, you become your own customer.
Right.
Right.
You can go down stack is what you're saying.
Right.
But if you're a global payroll provider and you want to become an EOR, you're going up stack. You think you know what an EOR does, and you think you know what EOR customers want, but you don't. You have no idea because they're not your customers.
Yeah. I think in the down stack instance, it's more about, do you really want to go down stack, right? Because you described beautifully, the difference in margin, the difference in pricing, the difference in, in the business itself between EOR and global payroll. And so you may think you want to go down stack. I think time will tell, right? How many really stay down stack or do a good job of that and enjoy that as an extension of their business.
Yeah.
By the way, that what you just said, Julie, is what I was saying a few years ago. Exactly that. What I came to learn, thanks to my amazing strategy officer Brad, who comes from the EOR world, what I came to understand is that they don't actually have a choice, because if you're a successful EOR provider and you have successful customers, they will grow in size and they will outgrow you. It's the natural order of things, right? So, you're helping a company, hire 2 salespeople in Barcelona, Spain, and then 3 years later, they decide to open a legal entity in Spain, and now they got 100 people there, right? You'd think this is a good story, but it's not.
Yeah.
Because if you're the EOR, you're not going from 2 to 100, you're going from 2 to 0.
Yeah, except at what point in time, right, does the EOR premium model top out, and then they opt into something else? But what your point is, actually, if you're doing it if you're successful, multiple clients are coming to you, and you're growing in scale that way also, right? It doesn't forcibly have to be just the single client.
Well, the churn for those guys is so much. That's why, they've had to get into all these areas, right? They're a talent solution. They're a payroll heavy solution. They're a employment solution. And none of them have particularly impressive tech to lay on top of all of what is arguably all the same vendors locally supporting all of these same solutions, these 150 or 200. It feels like there's a new EOR every day. It's like what happens? Like, who's going to be left standing, Jerome?
I don't know who's going to be left standing, but I think just to finish on that conversation, the client acquisition cost for EORs is relatively high.
It is.
So you would, all other things being equal, you would much rather keep your existing clients than go and hunt for new ones, especially given what you guys have said, which is there are so many so much competition out there. So they are actually, sort of painting themselves in a corner, Julie, because as they grow, like you said, you can no longer, the client can no longer afford to keep an EOR service for 100 employees. So that's part of the reason why they'd be setting a legal entity. That's not the only reason. In many countries, you're forced by law to do that.
Right.
So there's a natural tapering off of growth that occurs in the EOR space. And so if you're the EOR, you're thinking, okay, I've invested all of this effort, technology, money in getting my payrolls, efficiently run, as efficiently as you can, right? Is there a way for me to leverage this to sell more payroll? It's like a natural thing to do. What else are you going to do? Who's going to be left standing? I have no idea. And I don't want to pick winners, but it's interesting to me how the leaders are following very different strategies. I mean, Deal, for example,
they are.
Yeah. Deal is going for an IPO. That's their strategy, and they're maximizing their portfolio, in view of doing a great, public offering. That's the route they're taking. Others are going technology only and optimizing, the hell out of their tech stack, in the hope that they will bring the price down and serve a market that is very price sensitive and wants really good tech. Which of these, and others, as I said, will focus on the service side, which I think is actually a really good idea. Like I like this idea of focusing on service because it's too easy to do tech. It's good. It's easy to find good engineers. It's relatively easy to automate everything. But does it actually answer your customers' problems? Does it really help out your customers in the end? It's like when you automate everything, you're helping yourself first and your customers second.
It's funny. I think that value proposition, the challenge with that is employers, then believe, oh, that's the easy part, or I can just put, my employee X on this and cover that as well. And it becomes a conversation about the quality, right? And how much, where and how you add the best value and what that value is, which is something we've seen as underrepresented for a little while now.
Yeah. Jerome, one of the other things that you posted recently, I was really fascinated by. You posted this in conjunction with the Benedict Evans calling Gen AI capability a commodity of infrastructure. And you mentioned in there that HR and payroll data is the lifeblood of payroll service industry and that it is, quote, been overlooked and as a competitive differentiator and essentially ignored as a value add altogether. Talk about that a little bit. And how do you think providers can reverse that?
Well, I'll summarize the reason why I said this. It's very simple. So when I was working with ADP and I was responsible for the Global View platform, so I had the R&D budget for Global View worldwide. And if I looked at my budgets and if I look at my costs, I realized that 75% of my costs, R&D costs, right, technology costs, were relating to data transfer of some kind.
Wow.
Interfaces in, interfaces out, custom reporting, custom interfaces, cleaning data, onboarding clients, onboarding tools, all of that. None of it, not none of it, 25% only was actual payroll related. And since then, I've had a number of different roles, both advisory roles, but also, executive roles in sort of similar contexts. And I've seen exactly the same thing. Everyone has the same experience. Most of costs have to do with dealing with data. Because the thing is, whether you have in-house payroll or whether you outsource it, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. In either case, people who do it well will have templates. They will have standard sets of rules. So if you want to go and set up payroll, in France, they're not going to go and set up payroll from scratch for you. They have, 150 rules that they've used, tested. They test them every month. Those codes, those calculations that are assigned to codes, you know how it works. Like, these exist. These are models. And when you come with your requirement as a customer, all they do is they pick from that list of things that they've already tested, and they just rename some of them to give them the names that you want, right? That you're familiar with. And that's how they set up payroll for you. That's how it works everywhere. So the amount of work involved in setting up payroll calculation is actually almost trivial compared to the overall cost.
Right.
Most of the costs have to do with, all right, let's sit down, Mr. Customer. So what data do you have? And I say, well, we use a Workday system. Oh, okay. All right. Do you know how to export your data? No, we've never done it before. Okay. So they're going to need to get a consultant, and then they're going to run the PESI thing, and then they're going to give us the data. They're going to give the payroll provider the data, and then the payroll provider is going to say, okay, well, there's a whole bunch of things that are missing here. Are you going to store them, or are we going to store them? And then there's like a whole debate about where is this data supposed to live. And then, oh, by the way, we don't want the PESI to look like this. We want it slightly different. And then we're going to need to adjust our integration mechanism so that we can read your PESI in the way that you've produced it. That's just getting the data in, right? And then during the implementation, it will be, well, the client won't sign off on the implementation. Why not? Well, because we don't know if the new payroll results are similar to the old ones. Can you prove to us that they're similar? Now you have to go through the whole process of data mapping all over again. Now you're mapping legacy data to new data. That can take months. Just to do that, just to get sign off. And then for and I'm not even talking about how do you reconcile payroll results? How does it get back into the Workday system? And I'm using Workday. It could be any system. It doesn't matter.
Right.
That's where the cost is. This is where people spend their time. This is where the complexity lies. This is where arguments with clients occur. This is where clients start hating you as a provider, because that is when they start to realize the amount of friction involved with outsourcing.
Yep. The value degrades.
And in their mind, they're paying you to get rid of these problems, and all you're doing is throwing all this back in their face and saying, I don't understand your data. It's not the right data. You don't have enough data, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Hey, everybody. Got a quick question for you. Is your job easy, stress-free, and full of rainbows and sunshine every single day? Yeah, I'd say that's a big fat no. Hi, I'm David Noe, host of Speakeasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners, and proud to be part of the Work Defined community. Take a step down into my speakeasy live on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we tackle HR and business challenges through raw, uncut, unfiltered conversations. This is HR like you've never heard it before. Bold, real, and full of practical takeaways. Real guests, bold insights, authentic conversations that drive change. Catch every episode on demand through your favorite podcast platform or all the content at speakeasyhr.com.
Yeah. So Jerome, what's the answer? Is AI going to save us? Is ML going to make this better? I mean, what do we do?
Just fix it all with a wave of
What do we
a
do?
wand.
Because
right
every
now,
vendor
Jerome.
thinks that they've solved everything, right? You know that, right?
Yes. We have a tendency of thinking that. I think I'm more cynical than most. So I'm not going to pretend that we've solved the world's problems, but we have solved some problems, some big ones. I think some aspects of the current batch of AI, so we're talking about Gen AI here, the NLP, so natural language processing capabilities of any of the AI technology that's out there is absolutely amazing. Amazing beyond people's wildest dreams, in fact. And unfortunately, that's also created expectations in other areas, which, are probably not going to come true. But as far as natural language processing is concerned, if you rethink the entire process of getting data from point A to point Z, which in the old days really was based around, hey, let's create a database with a data model, and then let's get the data in, and we'll clean it on the way in, and then we'll modify it on the way out. If you get away from that model and you take a much more dynamic model, which is, let's train an AI to recognize the data patterns that matter for our industry, right? I'm not talking about a universal solution to humanity's problems here. This is really about getting HR data from point A to point B. You can train an AI to be really, really good at it. Now, to train it, you need a completely different architecture for a platform. And when I realized that none of the current players can change their architecture. I mean, SAP is not tomorrow going to, give up on 50 years of, data modeling and go, oh, no, let's throw that out of the window. We don't need that.
Right.
And so for us, we saw this as a massive opportunity. It's like, okay, for a new starter right now, we can come up with a completely different architecture, which is entirely dynamic. In other words, nothing is hard-coded. And by training the AI, it can recognize the data that comes in. And similarly, you can train it on the data that goes out. So you can say, data that looks like this in this country for this payroll engine or for this context needs to look like that on the way out to be correct. And I mean, it's obviously not an easy thing to do. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it. But we did it. We spent 3 years of investment building this. And now the end result is, without any coding, our system is able to generate any connector, so any API, if we want to use the word API. It can generate any API from any source system to any target system and back. So in other words, it gets the data there, and then it gets the gross to net results back. And in the process, it does a full reconciliation. And that is something that was not even feasible 5 years ago. You couldn't even imagine that this would happen. So, end result, are we solving the problem of the industry? We are solving the implementation problem. Our clients have gone from, as I said, months of implementation into hours. That's real today. I think we have opportunities to improve in other areas. So I think, payroll network providers and connecting those networks in, the AI works great, but we can still do a lot more. We can help our clients a lot more. So we're investing a lot in that. So that's kind of where it's going. I'm not going to say it's all resolved.
Yeah.
But in a few months, in 2 months' time, we're going to release, the first global payroll API. So basically,
I love it.
A single API where you will be able to connect any HR system. And I'm not talking about certified integration. I'm not talking about, literally hard coding an integration with Workday, PESI, or SAP, or SuccessFactor. but a dynamically generated API that recognizes any HR system and similarly can recognize any payroll engine and connect those two seamlessly.
Yeah, that's impressive. I know I've seen it. It's great. And I'll tell you, I have customers who are our vendor customers, obviously, who are leveraging your solution and they're finding incredible value from it. And I encourage so many to check it out. I think it's fantastic. I love what you guys are doing, man. And I want to stay close to it. So Jerome, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot a little bit, can we wrap this up with maybe a prognostication here? 3 years from now, what do you think the global payroll, global EOR marketplace looks like in terms of, just tech and value prop and all of that? I mean, where do we end up?
I'm sincerely hoping that as the interest rates start normalizing again, we're going to see a resurgence of the demand for EORs, and hopefully that will save a lot of the players that are struggling at the moment. I don't see how the industry will not consolidate. I think it has to consolidate.
Yeah.
And I think the winners will be those who figure out efficient ways of acquiring other EORs or merging with other EORs. Merging two networks of payroll is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
Amen.
So I think there will be some I don't see consolidation I don't see massive consolidation in the next 12 months simply because it's so hard to execute. Yeah. I think it would make sense to do it, but from a business perspective, but I think technically, I struggle to see how it'll be executed.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And I do think you're right. I think the EORs are in a really unique position at the front row of a huge opportunity when it comes to enabling that multi-channel talent, enabling the compliance and the straight through payment of those folks, and then also passing data back to the org to be able to make some decisions around it. So, and the incredible insights they have, right, from all that they do. So I think it's really going to be fascinating. I do think that they've got to figure out their tech, right? I think there's just a lot of opportunity there with the tech to come forward. I think some are doing it better than others, like a Deal, for example. It feels like they're turning out something new every week. But I think there's others that are really kind of in a paralyzed state where they're not sure where to go with their technology. So it's going to be interesting to see what plays out.
Well, I think the industry started off building appendages to existing enterprise systems, right? So,
yeah.
If you think about a multinational company, they've already bought Workday, let's say, and a bunch of other products, most likely, that they've integrated into their Workday platform. And, for them to go out to an EOR and hire another 20 people in 15 different countries, they don't need a lot of tech. They just need somewhere they can go onboard someone or, pay somebody a bonus, request a bonus to be paid or something like that. And so a lot of the platforms reflect that ethos, right? It's a relatively simple technology. It's not designed to be fully scalable as an enterprise platform, but it does what it's supposed to do really, really well and elegantly. That's what they are designed to do. And I would say the vast majority that I've seen, at least, are very elegant from an end user perspective, but they are not scalable enterprise platforms. And what Deal is saying and doing, and others like Helios, I think it was announced,
great example,
right? These guys. Well, let's talk about Helios.
Yeah.
In particular, they're going out of the gate saying, we are building for scalability, for your scalability, Mr. Customer. We're building a platform that is not only just an EOR like you would expect, but also you can get all your contractors, all your permanents. You can also get your entire HR function around this platform. So they're building a replacement for EOR, global payroll, contractor payroll, as well as sort of the traditional, HR stuff.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I work closely. We just had Rick Hamill on recently on the show. Yeah, and
not posted yet.
It's not up yet, but it'll be there by the time this runs. But I also wrote an article, a very lengthy article on what they're building, so that'll be coming out very soon. So I agree. I think Rick's taking a very agile approach to this, and I think it is sort of a step towards what we're seeing. Like I said, with Payslip and the SaaS, right? It's a much more agile approach that I think is going to be interesting to see how that plays out too. So
But he's gearing for scale out of the gate, and that I think is great foresight. I mean, he's gonna have to execute. This is not an easy strategy to execute because you're doing a lot of different things.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Great point. Jerome, look, this has been outstanding, man. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I can't wait to, I always love talking to you, and I hope I'll see you out there. Are we going to see you out on the fall tech trail at all? The tech season, HR tech season?
Well, I assume you're going to be in Las Vegas, right?
Yes, sir. Multiple times,
sir.
probably about 6 times before it's over.
Julie, you're going to be in Las Vegas as well?
Yes, indeed. So hopefully we can find an in-person moment.
That would be fantastic. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Great seeing you guys, and we'll be back soon.
Awesome.